Welcome to Sane-ish, the podcast for people healing from trauma, addiction, abuse, mental health struggles, grief, narcissists, and every other flavor of chaos life can throw at you. And somehow still functioning, mostly. I'm your host, Holley Broughton, survivor, truth teller, boundary setter, and proud member of the Still Healing, Still Hilarious Club. Around here, we don't do shame or embarrassment. We don't do perfection. Just real talk, dark humor, hard truths, and a whole lot of hope. Because sanity is overrated. And healing, that shit is messy. This is Sane-ish. Let's get into it. Disclaimer. On the Sane-ish podcast, we discuss personal stories of alcoholism, addiction, mental health, chronic illness, narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, SA, HT, parental alienation, grief, loss, homelessness, as well as many other forms of adversities in life. Our intention is to be inspirational, educational, identifiable, and resourceful. The views and experiences shared are in no way meant to praise or condone any illegal or harmful behavior. This content is for educational purposes only and not intended as professional advice. If you or someone you know is struggling with any of the above, we strongly suggest seeking help from a qualified professional, support service, or hotline related to your specific issue. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sane-ish podcast. Holley Broughton here. And today we're on our 32nd episode. And guess what? Today's guest is me. And we're going to be talking about mental health today. Go figure. And so let's talk about that which we almost never talk about. The advantages of struggling with mental health. And now, stay with me. I'm not glamorizing pain. I'm not romanticizing trauma. I'm not, depression is not cute. Anxiety isn't trendy. PTSD isn't poetic. But what if buried inside the struggle are strengths that most people never develop? Because that's what I've noticed. People who have wrestled with their mental health tend to have a depth that most people can't fake. They read rooms faster. They sense shifts in energy, notice what's unsaid. They understand silence. That's not a weakness. That's a heightened awareness. People who have battled anxiety, they're planners, protectors, problem solvers. Their brains learn to scan for danger. And when that skill is regulated, instead of running wild, it becomes discernment. People who have walked through depression, they develop compassion on a cellular level. They don't rush someone's grief. They don't dismiss pain with cliches. They know what it feels like to survive a day that's felt impossible. That creates empathy that cannot be taught in a textbook. And resilience, let's talk about resilience. When you've had to fight your own mind and still show up for your children, your job, recovery, your faith, your responsibilities, that is strength most people will never see on the outside. But you know what it costs to get out of bed. You know what it costs to stay sober. You know what it costs not to quit. That builds endurance. There's also emotional intelligence. When you've had to sit in therapy, unpack trauma, learn your triggers, regulate your nervous system, you become fluent in emotions, yours and other people's. You learn boundaries. You learn self-awareness. You learn to lean in and when to walk away. That is power. That's your superpower. And here's something else no one says out loud. People who have struggled with mental health often become cycle breakers because once you see the patterns, the addiction, the silence, the shame, the generational trauma, you can't unsee them. And you decide it stops here. That is leadership. Not loud leadership, but legacy leadership. Now, let me be clear. The struggle itself is not the advantage, but healing is. The willingness to look at yourself honestly, the courage to ask for help, the humility to grow, this decision to stay, that's where the advantage lives. Your story gives you relatability. Your scars give you credibility. Your survival gives you authority. And in a world that is starving for authenticity, that matters. Mental health challenges do not disqualify you. If anything, when you do the work, they refine you. They sharpen your empathy. They deepen your faith. They strengthen your boundaries. They clarify your values. You don't just survive, you evolve. And maybe, just maybe, the thing you thought would disqualify you becomes the very thing that equips you to help someone else breathe again. That's not hopeless. That is powerful. So I wanted to talk about mental health being a positive instead of talking about the negatives because mental health and mental health challenges are usually talked about in abyss, but there actually are positives about mental health that people don't seem to realize. But you have to do work regarding mental health. I've had to do work with my mental health and some of the challenges that I've had to face. Some of it that I've known about, other challenges that I have had to face throughout some things that were unforeseen, meaning trauma and that type of thing. But anyway, so mental health treatment actually works like a lot. Around 70 to 90% of people who receive proper treatment for depression experience significant improvement. Therapy, support, and sometimes medication can reduce symptoms dramatically. Most people recover fully and live stable, purpose driven lives. And that's not a weakness. That's evidence-based resilience. And the brain can heal because neuroplasticity is real. Your brain is not concrete. It's clay, per se. Research shows that the brain can form new neural pathways throughout life. Practices like therapy, mindfulness, exercise, sobriety, safe relationships, sleep, healthy eating, those type of things can literally change brain structure over time. So you're not permanently wired for pain. Some of the most brilliant minds have lived with mental health challenges. Abraham Lincoln struggled with severe depression, yet led a nation through civil war. Simone Biles publicly prioritized her mental health during the Olympics, redefining strength on a global stage. So mental health doesn't cancel greatness. It often deepens empathy. Mental health, they're actually, and I have said this before, because of my life experiences now, I am a peer support specialist certified by the state of Texas. I am a recovery peer support specialist and a mental health peer support specialist in the state of Texas. So I do a lot of work in recovery, both in alcoholism and addiction, also with mental health, domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, human trafficking, narcissistic abuse, parental alienation, homelessness, imposter syndrome, types of life adversities, chronic illness. Just, I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of those things overlap. And so peer support is changing lives. truly. Peer support programs, especially in recovery communities, reduce hospitalization rates and increase long-term stability. People with lived experience are uniquely powerful healers. When someone says, "Me too," the nervous system calms, shame loses oxygen. And what that means is even when I'm helping another person who I know has gone through the same thing, it helps me relax because I know I'm safe with that person, even though I know they may still be in that situation. I know that I'm safe with that person, and they know that they're safe with me because they know I can relate to them, and they know that I'm being authentic with them. So it's a very safe place to be when you're speaking with a peer support specialist because they know. They've lived through stuff like that. So if you're unaware of the peer support community, you might want to reach out in your community and see if you can locate a peer support specialist in your community because they are very helpful. Post-traumatic growth is real. We talk about PTSD, but there are also post-traumatic growth. Studies show many people report increased appreciation for life, stronger relationships, deeper spirituality, greater personal strength. Pain doesn't automatically produce growth, but healing can. Gen Z and millennials are breaking the stigma. Younger generations are more likely to go to therapy, more likely to talk openly about anxiety and trauma and depression, less likely to equate mental illness with a weakness. That cultural shift is massive. Silence is shrinking. And I'd like to say that the generations behind those, I'm seeing a trend where in our last episode with Natalie about estrangement, it seems like they're kind of jumping from "you hurt my feelings" to "you're toxic." They're just like skipping a whole, I don't know why. I don't know if that's social media. I don't know if it's just a trend, but I encourage you to think critically and to really care for those relationships first before you just jump to toxic. Nurture those relationships first before you just assume that they're toxic. They may very well be toxic, but at least work on them first before you try to just assume that they are. I don't know your situation. I have been in a toxic relationship myself, and it took me many years to realize it was a toxic relationship. But I tried. Trust me. And I learned, but I didn't just go from, you hurt my feelings to you're toxic. I did my best. So I just want to put it out there. So recovery is more common than you think. In addiction, recovery alone, millions of Americans are in long-term remission. The recovery community is one of the most invisible success stories in the country. People rebuild careers, families reconcile, purpose gets rediscovered, brain chemistry stabilizes, and identity transforms. That is not rare. It's just underreported. And why it's underreported is a lot of programs are anonymous. People want to keep their anonymity when they join recovery. There's a lot of anonymous programs. And there's a lot of people in certain different types of employment that they don't want to share their recovery in. So they choose to remain anonymous. So recovery isn't reported that often. And that's why it's underreported. But I do think it is, in my experience, and for me, I can only speak from my experience, but it has been a blessing for me because it's turned my life around. I'm able to do this. I'm able to work with a lot of fascinating people. I'm able to have genuine relationships with people. I'm able to be myself, love myself the way I am today, and not feel bad about what I did the day before or how I treated somebody. or even wonder how I treated somebody the day before. I can take accountability for myself today. It's just an amazing way to live. So I encourage anyone who is looking for recovery to please stay. Whatever, and there's many pathways to recovery. So whichever way you decide to go, please stay, and please just walk whatever path you choose to go, and just keep going one day at a time. Laughter is therapeutic. Research shows laughter lowers stress hormones, boosts immune function, improves mood, and increases social bonding. And I can tell you that for a fact. Laughter is so part of my well being. I think if you've watched my podcast for a while now, I think you notice that I don't think I've had a podcast that I haven't laughed on yet. So, and that's just me in general. I think all of my near and dear friends can tell you that's just who I am. I, I'm a jokester, prankster. I love laughter. So, yes, laughter is best medicine, guaranteed. So, technically, your sense of humor is a wellness strategy. Doctor's orders, find something ridiculous daily. And I mean, okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm not even going to go there. I could really, anyway. Mental health awareness has doubled in 2 decades. Public education campaigns, workplace accommodations, school counseling programs, these didn't exist at this scale 30 years ago. Let's remember that. We are in the middle of a cultural mental health evolution, and we're not done yet. I'm going to shut up. The most powerful truth, the mental health struggles do not define identity. I want to make that very clear. A diagnosis describes symptoms. Get that? It does not describe your character. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. People are creative, loyal, faithful, brave, compassionate, funny, humorous, generous, genuine, authentic, but they're also sometimes anxious, depressed, recovering, manic, flighty. So both can exist. So do you see how that I'm trying to get my listeners who struggle with, you know, mental health issues to understand there's nothing wrong with you. You actually, if you change your perception, you actually have a superpower. Mental health struggles don't erase brilliance. In many cases, they coexist with it. Does that make sense? Sensitivity often reframes creativity. Depth often fuels leadership. Emotional intensity often fuels innovation. So, and we have some people like Winston Churchill. He called his depression the black dog. It followed him for years. And yet, during one of the darkest periods in modern history, he became the steady voice that helped lead a nation through war. And again, Abraham Lincoln documented episodes of deep depression, grief, emotional collapse, and still he carried the moral weight of a divided country and helped end slavery. So pain did not cancel their purpose. It deepened it. Now we can move on to creativity. So there was Vincent van Gogh. He wrestled with severe mental illness, and in his lifetime, he was largely misunderstood. But today, his work is absolutely priceless. His sensitivity became his signature. Ludwig van Beethoven, he battled depression and began losing his hearing. The very sense a composer depends on. So imagine that. And yet he composed some of the most triumphant music in history while descending into silence. And that's not a weakness, that's defiant. And so there's a few of those people for you. We also have Theodore Roosevelt. He suffered profound grief and depression after losing his wife and his mother on the same day. And he channeled that pain into reinvention and public service. Sylvia Plath openly wrote about her depression, bringing raw honesty into literature long before mental health conversations were common. Robin Williams, as we all know, struggled with depression and addiction while bringing joy and laughter to millions. Carrie Fisher spoke openly about living with bipolar disorder and helped normalize mental health conversations in Hollywood. Sir Isaac Newton experienced what many historians believe were severe depressive episodes and possible nervous breakdowns. Nikola Tesla exhibited obsessive disorders and symptoms consistent with OCD. Adele has discussed postpartum depression and anxiety. Michael Phelps openly shares his battles with depression, even after becoming the most decorated Olympian in history. There's a lot of people who struggle with mental health who are quite popular out there, famous, well-known leaders, artists, innovators, athletes, presidents, composers. Maybe you will be the next one. Who knows? You don't have to have any mental health overshadow who you are or have mental health define who you are. I don't have my alcoholism and addiction define who I am. I don't have my mental health define who I am. I don't have my chronic illness define who I am. I've had people try to make that a part of who I am, try to make me less than. And that's just not who I am. It obviously has affected me in my life, but it's not who I am. It's something that has happened to me. The difference between tragedy and transformation often isn't the struggle itself. It's what happens when someone chooses to seek help, to stay, to keep going, to turn pain into purpose. So you're not disqualified by your anxiety. You're not weak because of your depression. You're not broken because you needed support. If anything, history shows us something powerful. The mind that feels deeply often creates deeply, leads deeply, loves deeply. So you're in powerful company and your story is not over. So, and I wanted to get to a couple of famous people that you may or may not have heard of that I think were brilliant that struggled with mental health. And I like them because they were very forthcoming about their mental health and because they were so forthcoming with their mental illness at a time when it was not acceptable. I really respected them. And one of them is Oscar Levant. And this was back in the 40s. He was a brilliant concert pianist and composer and actor. And he was in movies like An American in Paris, Barclays of Broadway. And he was openly hospitalized multiple times for mental health treatment. And he spoke candidly about his anxiety and depression in the late 40s and 50s. Decades before public conversations about mental health were common. And he once famously joked, there's a fine line between genius and insanity. I have erased that line. And behind the humor was honesty with him. He was very funny. He didn't hide his struggles. He humanized them. And he continued performing, creating, and working in Hollywood anyway. Transparency didn't weaken him, it made him relatable. Again, he was a concert pianist, a composer, a film actor, a regular on radio and television during Hollywood's golden age. Brilliant, quick-witted, razor-sharp humor. He was hospitalized multiple times for severe anxiety and depression. In the 40s and 50s, when mental health was whispered about, hidden, or flat out denied, he talked about it publicly, on air, on stage. People laughed, but underneath the humor was something powerful, honesty. He didn't pretend he was fine. He didn't build a fake image of perfection. He let people see his struggle and his talent at the same time. He kept performing, he kept creating, he kept showing up, not because he wasn't struggling, but because struggling didn't cancel his brilliance. And maybe that's the point. Mental health challenges and talent can coexist. Vulnerability and intelligence can coexist. Humor and pain can coexist. Oscar Levant proved that decades ago. And then there was another person back earlier than that, a woman, and you may have heard of her too, Frances Farmer, who was a rising Hollywood star in the 30s, celebrated for her intelligence, dependence, and refusal to conform. She challenged the studio system, rejected publicity stunts, and refused to play the perfect starlet role expected of women at the time. And she was later institutionalized multiple times for mental health treatment during an era when women who were outspoken, depressed, or non-compliant were often labeled as difficult or unstable. Her story has been surrounded by myth and controversy over the years, but what remains clear is this. She was talented. She was a talented, complex woman living in a time when mental health treatment, especially for women, was often harsh, stigmatized, and deeply misunderstood. Sometimes what history calls unstable was simply a woman ahead of her time, and that independence came at a cost. Over the years, her story became surrounded by dramatic claims and rumors, some of which historians continue to debate. But what isn't debated is this. She was talented, she was complicated, and she was human. Her life reflects a time when mental health care lacked compassion, when public image mattered more than personal well-being, and when vulnerability could cost you your career. Frances Farmer's story isn't about illness. It's about how far we have come, how important it is to keep pushing for dignity, nuance, and humane treatment in mental health. Sometimes history just doesn't tell us about who struggled. It shows us why compassion matters. And there actually was a movie, I don't know, I guess back in 1980 about her called Frances. So if you want to check it out, then you can kind of see her story and what she went through. It's very heartbreaking. At least today, you and I have a choice, whereas Frances did not. Frances and Oscar didn't have a choice, especially Frances because she was a woman. So we've come a little bit farther today, but I do want you to know that we're better off today than back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So just know that. I hope our little episode today has helped give you a different perspective on mental health, different eras, different personalities, different outcomes. But there's one shared truth. They were brave to become human. Winston Churchill called his depression his black dog. It followed him, it weighed on him, and still he stood in front of a nation during a war, spoke courage into fear. And that's bravery. Oscar Levant didn't hide his anxiety and depression behind his polished image. He joked about it. He talked about it. He let people see his brilliance and his brokenness in the same breath. And that's bravery. And Frances Farmer, outspoken, intelligent, unwilling to shrink herself, lived in a time when mental health treatment was often cold and unforgiving. Her story is complicated, painful, and human, and surviving in a system that didn't yet understand you. That takes bravery too. None of them were perfect. None of them were untouched by struggle, but their mental health challenges did not erase their impact, and neither do yours. You may not be leading the country. You may not be on a Hollywood stage. You may not be behind a grand piano, but you got out of bed today when it felt heavy. You chose sobriety again. You asked for help. You set a boundary. You stayed when quitting felt easier. That is courage. History often remembers the victories. It doesn't always record the private battle. But make no mistake, the private battles are where the strength is forged. So today we honor their bravery and we honor yours because being human, fully, honestly, and perfectly human, it's not a weakness. It's the bravest thing that you can be. So, what if, I'm going to leave you with this, what if the very thing you've been ashamed of is actually the thing that makes you powerful? Think about it. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining me. And if you struggle with mental health issues, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. So, turn it around, make it into your superpower. Because who knows? You could be the next Francis Farmer, Oscar Levant, Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, Michael Phelps, Simone Biles. Maybe not exactly like that, but who knows? Just don't discredit yourself. Change your perspective. See what happens. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. And stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you soon. Take care.